Good morning. Thank you for joining us again on this program. It's good to have you with us. Today we're going to study Daniel chapter 6. This is about King Darius, who took over the kingdom of Persia from King Belshazzar, who we looked at yesterday. And we find in chapter 6 verse 1, it said it pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them. One of them was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators, satraps, tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. Notice this, as we've gone through this week, I said to you, look at this character Daniel. He is absolutely incredible. Now, can you believe that verse? Listen again, verse 4. They tried to find charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. The word had got out. Daniel is going to be made first in the land under the king. We've got to get him. You see, jealousy existed in those days just as jealousy exists today. And when jealousy exists, men act in all sorts of strange ways. Incredible. And they will go to any lengths once that jealousy gets a hold. And these men were ready to go to any lengths. So then it also says this. They could find no corruption in Daniel because he was trustworthy, neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, and this is one of the most wonderful verses of the whole of Scripture. Look at it when you get home. Daniel 6, verse 5. We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if that were true for you and me? That people could find absolutely nothing wrong within us unless it's to do with the law of our God. Most of us, they can find things so much more easily than that, can't they? They said, if we're going to trap this man, it's got to be something to do with his God, because he's so faithful, he's so straight, he's so right, he's got it so well together. You see, Daniel was a man who kept with his God, kept in touch with God, worked with God, and that was the result. And you see, it overflows. It's not just that it happened in the area of religion. I think we made an awful mistake, and I think in a way the nation helps here by talking about church and state. You can't divide like that. The people of the church are part of the state. How can you make those divisions? The sacred and the secular. Nonsense. Our lives should all be sacred. That sacred should flow into the secular and make it sacred. That's where we get into problems. So we're putting our religion on and then we're shedding it. You can't do that. Christianity is a relationship that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every week of the month, every month of the year. We are in a relationship with the King of Kings, and that never stops. So in our work, there should be the flow of the law of our God as far as possible. Now, if you're working as a nurse, you don't go into hospital and start praying with every patient, because the next thing is you're going to be looking for a job. If you're a school teacher, you don't go into school and start talking about Jesus Christ, or you're going to be looking for a job. We understand that. We are wise, I hope, in the Holy Spirit. But by the same token, as you go into that faculty room, as you go into that nurse's room, you take the King of Kings in with you. Then let him shine through you to those other people. He obviously shone through Daniel. Listen again. Let me read those 2 verses because they're incredible. They could find no corruption in him. He was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So they went as a group to the king and said, "O King Darius, live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that if anyone prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be annulled. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Stupid man, what happened? Well, they flattered him. They said, "O king, we've come up with a great idea. No one is to pray to any god or any man except you for the next 60 days. King Darius said, "Wow, this is great. Let's go. Where's the decree? I'll sign it. Isn't that fantastic?" Darius, you can't do things like that. And what he missed was his friend Daniel. Verse 10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his bedroom, where the windows were open to Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Now notice that. I think it's very vital. He knew the decree had been signed. He didn't do anything different. He did what he always did. He simply knelt down and prayed to his God. 3 times a day on his knees. Is that you? Is that me? We're fortunate if we get once a day. Not Daniel. 3 times a day he's there thanking his God. Verse 11. These men went as a group and told the king. They said, "We have found Daniel." And they spoke to him about the royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god except to you, O king, will be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be altered." Then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you." Now, isn't that interesting? Not Daniel, who's so well up in the authorities, exile from Judah. "O king, to do the decree that you put in writing, he still prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to the king and said, "Remember, O king, that you can't change the law in the Medes and Persians." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. You see, when the chips were down, Darius knew he blew it. Daniel was his friend. Daniel was the man the king looked up to, which is incredible in those days. But he was such a very special man, a man of God. And when he realized what he'd signed in that decree, he knew it had been arranged against Daniel. And he knew as king that flattery had absolutely spoilt what he really desired in his heart. So what was he going to do now? Well, it's fascinating. Listen to what the king said to Daniel. "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." You see, the king knew that. The king knew that this was a godly man. And then, verse 17, a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and the rings of the nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. But, verse 18, then the king returned to the palace and spent the night without eating, without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. Darius walked up and down all night, and those nobles knew that this man was absolutely distraught. But then when the day they got rid of Daniel, nothing more would be heard of this. Now one of them could be head of the land, and not this exile from Judah. That was a nasty one, wasn't it? They were just trying to get at Daniel in every way they could. You see, the jealousy had gone to hatred, and the hatred had gone to murder. I warn you, friend, if you have jealousy in your heart, you can go the same route. We say, "Richard, I wouldn't murder anyone." No, you wouldn't murder them, but you would want to, which Jesus says is just as bad. And that can happen for all of us. Now, verse 19. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and returned to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God." That's interesting, isn't it? "Has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." The king was overjoyed and gave order that Daniel should be lifted from the den. When Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he trusted in his God. You know, that's great, isn't it? How great is your trust in our God as you're driving to work today? Do you really trust him? Go back and check on Daniel. He didn't care what happened. He knew his God could carry him through. By the way, just let's look at a footnote. Verse 24. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. My goodness, that didn't take long, did it? And you see, those were ruthless days. If you were right with the king, everything in the garden was lovely. You stepped out of line with the king, and the next thing is, you were dead. And it wasn't just the men who were dead. Their wives, their children, those families were absolutely wiped out. That's the way it worked in those days. And Daniel, he prospered throughout the time that Darius was the king. Because it tells me in verse 28, the last verse, "So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus, the king of Persia." So he was under a fourth king, and all the time he was always in the lead position because he worshipped God and God looked after him. He trusted God totally and completely. And I think that's just the most marvelous thing that you've ever heard. The king, overjoyed, gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den, and when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in God. How great's your faith, friend? How much do you really believe? Do you trust God as Daniel did? Here is a man of God from beginning to end, a man of prayer, 3 times a day on his knees. He knew his God, and he communed with God, and the results are absolutely outstanding, and they can be for you.